Hello and welcome to the strangest gig I've ever played, true tales from the studio and the stage. I am your host, Chris J. Norwood, and I'm so excited for this episode's guest. He is the one and only 6-time Grammy Award-winning producer, singer-songwriter, amazing jazz pianist, record label executive, and author, and so much more. He is the one and only Charlie Peacock. We had a really awesome conversation. It was a thrill. So let's dive in. Yes, welcome back to the strangest gig. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, season's greetings. I am your host, Chris J. Norwood. Thank you so much for listening, for being a fan of the strangest gig. It really means a lot to me. We've had a pretty awesome season so far. It's been a lot of fun, a lot of really great guests, and we've got some more lined up for the next half of the season. So definitely stick around, tell your friends, spread the good word about the Strangest Gig podcast. If you were a church kid in the mid-90s like I was, you probably first came across Charlie's name in the liner notes for your favorite DC Talk record. He was the songwriter for one of their hit songs, In the Light. It's a really fantastic song. I encourage you to go check out his original version. Later on, he went on to start his own record label, Rethink Records, an imprint of EMI. At Rethink, he signed artists such as Sarah Mason and the multiple platinum award-winning band Switchfoot, and produced several of their early records. He tells a really great story about starting Rethink and signing Switchfoot in his own podcast called Music and Meaning. I highly encourage you to go check that out. It's a really fascinating listen. As a producer, he's worked with so many amazing artists like the aforementioned Switchfoot, as well as Holly Williams, The Lone Bellow, Brett Dennen, John Foreman, Chris Allen, Ben Rector, Chris Cornell, and Al Green, which Charlie tells a really fun story about later on in this podcast. He was also the producer for the hugely popular Americana folk duo, The Civil Wars. Charlie's memoir, Charlie Peacock Roots and Rhythm, comes out this February in 2025 and is available for pre-order now. His career, spanning close to 50 years, has been so incredible, it's really hard to distill down into a 30-minute intro. Please go check out his music. He's an amazing songwriter, amazing producer, amazing piano player. So without further ado, here he is. Producer's note. Charlie and I were chatting over Zoom, and there are a couple times where you will hear his connection get a little staticky. We appreciate your understanding. Cool. Well, Charlie Peacock, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm so thrilled to get to talk to you. I've been a great admirer of your work and your music for a long, long time. So this is a real thrill for me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.
So let's get into it. Tell me about your current gig. Tell me about what you're working on currently. You've put out a number of albums and music this year.
Yes. I have put out more music of my own in the last 7 years than I had in the previous 2 decades.
Yeah, wow.
Because I was so, those 2 decades were so filled with producing for other people.
Right.
And just other projects, songwriting for other people. And I was finishing up it was my last corporate publishing deal. And literally the day that I turned in all my songs, I knew that I wasn't going to do it anymore. It had been kind of a fail. I'd had a couple of cuts and some film soundtrack stuff. But it wasn't a good fit. And one of the things that I was struggling with is that I felt like the lane was getting smaller and smaller and so kind of less fulfilling. I wasn't able to really, expand on my abilities and play a lot of different kinds of music, which is what I love to do.
Yeah.
And the very next day after that contract was up, I got a call from what was then called the Facebook Music Initiative and later changed to Meta Music Initiative. And they wanted to fund me to just make any music that I wanted to make.
Oh, wow.
So it was like, hang on, wait a second.
Yeah.
Number one, with Facebook as, my partner, that just doesn't seem right. I mean, they're not in the business. They don't know anything about the music business. That's
Sure.
the business I've been in my whole life. And this just, this seems crazy. As it turns out, I tried it on a kind of trial basis. And as it turned out, it was one of the best relationships I've had with the corporation, integrating with them with my music. I basically was able to make all kinds of music, everything from 60-piece orchestra and piano pieces to all the jazz that I wanted to make, to the singer-songwriter and Americana folk music that I was at that time known for. And yeah, it was a wonderful relationship. 7 years, and as a result of that, put out about 330 songs through that relationship, and then they're allowed to use the songs on their platforms. So that naturally increased. Actually, gave me for my own music the biggest audience that I've had.
That's great
at this late date in my career, but. So
how did the back end on that work? Were you able to like retain ownership, or did they take a cut of publishing, or how did that work?
No, the way they do it as I can't reveal all the particulars, but I can just say that I retain all of the rights that you and I would want to have in terms of streaming rights and creative rights to take the music where we want to take it.
Okay, that's
and
neat.
It's basically the trade-off is that they sort of get the first use on their platforms. So
Gotcha.
I don't stream until they've had X amount of time on their first use on the on Facebook and Instagram platforms, and in all the other things that they're doing in metaverse kind of things as well.
Is that partnership still ongoing?
It's not. It just ended.
Okay.
Yeah, I just ended it. Which is part of the answer to your question too. Is like, what am I doing now? And what's important to me now is finishing up sort of this part of the story. I have this book coming out in February, which is my memoir, and so in some ways, once that's out and people have had a chance to read that sort of, to me, draws a line in a 50-year career in music.
Right.
And at that point, what I want to do is just create some space where I'm focused on finishing a few things that I have still yet to do, and then just open up some space for something new to happen, rather than kind of continuing with the same pattern. So that's really where I'm at right now, is like I'm finishing up these projects that I've had ongoing, whether they're books or music. I've got a few projects that I still have to mix and put out this after the first of the year.
Right.
But then I'll take a break,
Great.
and just create that space to see if something new is ready to emerge, something that maybe I didn't expect.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I like it.
Well, tell me more about the book. You said your memoir is coming out next year in February, correct?
Yeah, February 4th, 2025. And it's a book that I've worked on for over a decade.
Wow.
And, when you've lived, thousands of stories, it takes a while to figure out what makes up a memoir, because it's not an autobiography, and it's not an encyclopedia.
Yeah.
And so it's finding these story arcs that blend together and are threaded together in a way that makes a good read. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was important that it wasn't just sort of anecdotal one after another, but that it was literary as well, because I'm a writer and I love to write. And so hopefully it meets that criteria of like, oh, okay, well, this book has it has themes that I'm starting to see emerge
Yeah.
in it, but at the same time, for the kind of music nerd and music fan, that there'll be plenty of stuff where like, oh my gosh, that's great.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know that was the backstory of that
Yeah.
particular thing. So
That's neat.
try to melt those two worlds together in the book.
That's awesome. I'm interested. I'm excited to read the book first off, but I'm interested, and you kind of mentioned it. You talked about kind of your early career being so heavily involved in producing, but you started out as a singer songwriter.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I started out playing when I was 14 professionally in the first band, and then that just kind of evolved into me playing every weekend. Started out during horn bands in the 1970s, so I was a trumpet player. So, played all of the different repertoire from that time, Blood, Sweat, and Tears in Chicago
Yeah,
and
of course.
Lighthouse and all these different
Tower of
bands from
Power
that
and all
time.
those things. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then quickly taught myself to play piano and so I just kind of kept going.
So you're
As a
self-taught piano
weekend,
player?
I am, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
And I just worked a lot. I loved working. I loved playing every weekend, and I was good enough that I played with people that were 10 years older than me, so there was always um, something to learn in the process. Although since I was just a teenager, I had to stand outside the nightclub during the break.
Yeah.
In California, they had a thing called the bandstand law. And so if you were underage, as long as you were on the bandstand and playing music, you could be in the nightclubs that was a bar, serving
Yeah. Yeah.
alcohol. But the moment you were on break, the bouncer had to escort you outside and you had to stand out. So I would stand outside at the front door with the bouncer and then it'd be like 15 minutes and then we'd go back in
Yeah.
and that was kind of my life in high school and after that until I was 21.
Hmm.
But yeah, I started just playing music in California. In Northern California, eclecticism was really ruled because of the time that I grew up in, and also because of a fellow by the name of Bill Graham, who eventually was my manager for a time.
Oh, wow.
But he was really the architect of the Northern California sound, and from a concert level, because he would put Miles Davis on the same bill as Albert King and Jefferson Airplane, and so growing up, all of us in my generation in Northern California, we all just believed that I should be able to play electric piano like I see there. You have. I should be able to play like Herbie Hancock and Chick Corea, and I should also be able to accompany singer-songwriter like a James Taylor. I should also be able to play very complicated music like Mahavishnu Orchestra. I should be able to play the blues. And that was just the world that we grew up in. It was very black music oriented.
Yeah.
With the addition of the singer-songwriter and rock element. Of course, San Francisco was played a huge role in the 60s in terms of rock music. And so that's what I grew up with, and that's why I learned to play the way I play, and why I'm an eclectic producer, why I'm able to work in so many different genres. And it's funny though, I mean, you learn some really cool things along the way that you don't expect, because most people think you're just going to be learning about music, right?
Right.
And I remember this one gig, I was playing with this saxophonist named Rod Battaglia, Italian man. And he was, I don't know, he could have been 15 years older than me, I'm not sure. And I didn't bother really to learn the songs. They just I just played by ear. but I remember when we went and played at this one place, and Rod gathered all of us young guys together before the first song, and he said to us, "Hey, when the fight breaks out, stay on the bandstand, keep playing." And I'll never forget that. He didn't say if a fight breaks out. He said when the fight breaks out, stay on the bandstand and keep playing. And I still to this day, remembered that the song was "Get Ready" by Rare Earth.
Oh, wow.
Is the song that we were playing when the fight broke out. And yes, I stayed on the bandstand.
All right. That's great. Well, then what was the transition into producing like? Did you start out producing your own material, or was it just kind of a gradual interest that turned into a thing? Or
I did not start out I'm producing my own material, except as I had a couple of 2-track recorders and would do sound on sound multi-tracks. So that was kind of my first introduction to learning how to record. But it wasn't anything that I had released. It was just sort of the transition in high school of learning how to record and write songs. And it really wasn't until I was probably, I'm going to say maybe 21, 22 years old, that somebody asked me to co-produce a record, a single on a punk band in Sacramento. And my friend Steve Holzapfel and I co-produced the record. And Steve did have production experience, and he was really my mentor. And that was the very first. That was 1979. That was the very first record that I ever produced, and which was a huge challenge.
Yeah,
because it was a punk band that had jazzers in it, and that had 2 drummers. And which is always one drummer too many unless you're the Allman Brothers.
Sure.
But somehow managed to make it work. And I think one of the guys, maybe it was 2 years ago, one of the guys from the band told me that the single sells for like $200 now. It's a Northern California punk collector's item.
Yeah, I bet. Well, I'm also curious. You kind of started out, and maybe it's safe to say that you started out in what later became known as, CCM. You're kind of part of this first wave of artists like you, and also like Tony O'Kay and even Bruce Cockburn and Bourgeois. These people that were integrating faith into your music before CCM and T-Bone, absolutely.
Yeah.
But before CCM became a marketing term, and
I didn't even know about it until I went to a Christian bookstore fairly early on as a young Christian, and saw a magazine called CCM, and then figured out that it must be a genre of music. And kind of, as I would meet more and more Christians, I would pick up on, oh, okay, I see. Yeah. See what this is. But yeah, I mean, when I became a Christian, it was through this story of a saxophonist named Mike Butera, who was an incredible jazz saxophonist in California. And he told me the story of Jesus, and I believed it. And from that point on, my life really changed demonstrably, but also incrementally. I was a pretty popular musician, playing in clubs, playing my own music. And so kind of the first big step I took in terms of that wasn't to, go into contemporary Christian music. It was to take the F word out of 2 songs, and stop taking 10% of the bar, because I would get 100% of the door and 10% of the bar. And that's how much leverage I had as a popular artist playing their own music at that time, at a club level. I'm talking about, 200, 250 people a night.
Yeah.
And so I just made those kind of decisions, which for me were, sort of moral and ethical decisions that resulted from coming to Christ. And sobriety was really important to me then, just in terms of my own behavior and growing as a husband. And, I had really been an immature husband and young father. And for me, it was just such an important time of growing. But I stayed where I was, which
Right.
was, that's what I knew. I mean, I had to go play Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night somewhere,
Sure.
and was good at it. And people wanted to hear me do my own music. And I had already been active with major record labels, having interest in me and publishing companies and whatnot. So I was well on my way when a musician named Jimmy Abeg, who was a part of a group of people that were friendly with the Dylan musicians like T-Bone and Stephen Souls and all of that, those people from that time. And they had been doing some work together with them, and also this poet journalist from England named Steve Turner. And so there were these California people, these people from England, people from SoCal, and all kind of sharing from the same idea pool about what it meant to be a Christian, but also an artist.
Right.
And so there wasn't a sense, that group didn't talk about being contemporary Christian musicians or anything.
Right.
So that was my first introduction to having people sort of organize thought around the idea of what it would mean to be a follower of Christ, and to also be a fully committed artist.
Right.
And then I did meet people who were involved in contemporary Christian music. And then I did go on to move from California to Nashville to work specifically for a record label that had been a pioneer in contemporary Christian music, and did that for almost 10 years straight. I forget how many records I made during that time,
Yeah.
but well over 50 or 60 albums during a 10-year period. And that was as an artist, as a producer, and as a songwriter.
Yeah.
And also I began to develop other artists as well. They gave me a record label called Rethink that I developed with EMI Music. And then I signed a young band out of San Diego called Switchfoot.
Yeah. One of my favorite bands growing up. Absolutely.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. And then also a wonderful young artist from Detroit named Sarah Mason. And that kind of, I entered into sort of my more talent discovery mode at that
great.
point. But anyway, I may have jumped ahead a bit, but that kind of gives you a bit of the story.
Well, what I loved about Rethink and artists like Switchfoot and Sarah Mason is that they were incorporating their faith into their music, but it was just, they were telling their stories and the faith was a part of it.
Yeah.
But they weren't.
Well, it's being a person of your sort of contemporary pop time, and sounding like a person of your time, but also being very narrative oriented, literary oriented lyrics that are moving in between being descriptive, implicit, explicit, subscriptive, and sort of seamlessly integrated. So it's not like a didactic teaching kind of lyric.
Sure.
Or even from contemporary worship model of a lyric that we might be able to, pull off the internet right now and read. It wasn't like that. It was much more out of the story of the biblical narrative, which is vast, all different kinds of methods of using words, and also just drawn from the diversity of creation, that kind of model, and then drawn from the history of the arts, the way the artists think about how they create. And so that was much more that model. And I had a companion friend in that, a fellow by the name of Steve Taylor. So I kind of went first with Switchfoot and Sarah, and Steve came after me with Sixpence None the Richer.
Yeah.
But we were and Burlap to Kashmir and some other great bands.
Yeah.
But we were both trying to do the same thing. We had this idea that we didn't like crossover.
Yeah.
We didn't like this idea that you had to sell 500,000 records to Christians to get permission to just sell records,
Yeah.
or sell recordings. And so what we did was we worked out with our Christian music partners to use their distribution partners, because by that time they'd all been purchased by major entertainment corporations.
Yeah.
So for me, if I released a Switchfoot record, it was released on Sparrow and it was released on EMI as well.
Okay. Wow. And that's going back to their first record.
Yeah.
That way.
Yes. Yeah. Very much so. So we, which was, it cost twice the money to do it because you had 2 marketing budgets, 2 promotion budgets, and everything.
Sure.
So it was a challenge, but it was an innovation. We were trying something different. And then, when we finally sort of delivered on the promise was when Sparrow was willing to go ahead and sell their contract to Columbia Records, and then that's when we had the big breakout hits,
right?
In the early, 2003, 2004, yeah, Meant to Live and Dare You to Move and all that.
And then, did you produce those records?
I co-produced the single Dare You to Move during that time, with John Fields. But John Fields was along with the band was really the architect of that next big record. I remained their publisher for the first 5 records that we did, and I think I played on every record or did something.
Wow.
But as far as producing, I produced Learning to Breathe and A New Way to Be Human. And then just kind of either played on or produced sort of random tracks from the band. And of course I worked on all of John Foreman's solo records as well.
Yeah. Well, then I was, so a lot of those ideas that you were talking about, I'm assuming they kind of led to you starting and forming Art House. Can you talk about kind of the beginnings of Art House and what that turned into?
Yeah, it was actually the inverse. Art House ideas are what led to those musical decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they started out as how I thought about something dictated how I acted and what I created. And so the thinking through part was a period of study, of art philosophy and theology, and then looking at different thinkers and theologians around the world and how people had interacted with art. And then kind of putting that together for myself in my own context. So most of the decisions that I've made for my own career or for the careers of others or the building of a record label, all those things were started out as these initial ideas about what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be an artist, which became, more codified in this idea of the art house. Right. Which, as being in Dallas, that, there's an Art House Dallas. And so it has become a broader idea about what it means to create for the common good, or what I would call cosmic betterment of everyone,
Yeah.
and to be a contributor to your communities, to be not just art makers, though of course that's an emphasis and important, but what does it mean for each individual person to live an artful life so that they leave behind artifacts that have value in communities and in people's hearts and minds.
I wanted to ask also about so you obviously produced the Civil Wars records. When y'all were
Mhm.
working on those records, was there a sense that they were going to become as big as they became? Because they exploded and they kind of uh
I
for a
had a
period for
very, yeah, I had a very strong sense, the way I did with Switchfoot,
hmm
that we were on to something, that if everything went right,
yeah.
if everything sort of fell into place, because you can make great music, sometimes it just, there's so many other issues, that things that go wrong.
Mhm.
Um,
And what do you think I mean, could you put your finger on what maybe the special sauce was that worked between John and Joy?
yes, yes, absolutely. It's a part of it is the time,
hmm
is that the world was ready for that,
Yeah.
and we were right. We were all in the right place in Nashville
Yeah.
at the right time of the Americana folk boom. And there was a real interest in that. There was an interest in simplicity, people wanting to really hear the melodies very clearly, lot less production.
Yeah.
So more like, from a painting analogy, it would be like going from very dense abstracts to minimalism,
hmm
with the simple stripe and a square on a white canvas.
Yeah.
Um, and the other thing that I think made them very special was the interaction between the two of them and the dynamics.
Yeah.
And I think that people, when we've been living through this time where, 20 years ago, we talked about the beginning of the loudness wars and mastering,
Right.
and making tracks as loud as they possibly could be and compressing them to the point that if you look at the waveform, every single choice that you can see, whether it's a snare drum or a vocal, as you're looking at the waveform, you can see that they're all at the same level.
Yeah.
And what we did was that we made music that had these huge mountainous peaks, right? And
hmm
then really soft valleys.
Yeah.
And so the dynamics, I think that was hugely attractive to people. The quality of their voices, the blend of it,
hmm
the songs, JP's unique guitar playing style, how economic it was. I think, because we didn't, if you go through, you'll hardly ever hear like just sort of straight strumming,
Yeah.
um, like a song, count it off and just strum through the whole song.
Sure.
You won't hear that.
hmm
Um, and so you're constantly being wooed. The
hmm
music is wooing you the whole time. It's saying, come in, go out, come in, go out, and you have that sense. And even if you don't know how to articulate it with words, it's happening to you
Yeah.
and you feel it, and it reminds you. And again, you may not be able to talk about it like this, but it's basically reminding the human being that this is what music does well.
Right. Would they record their vocals at the same time in the
Yes, we
same
did
booth?
everything live. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I think that adds to the what you were talking about, the magic of it all, just
Yeah.
hearing
Yeah.
the interplay together.
Absolutely. And I still comped performances, but I
Mhm.
comped whole performances. I might take a verse from one performance and a chorus from another,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, it was all of it together. If it was piano and guitar or just guitar, yeah, and
Would he? So
vocals.
he'd play and sing, and they'd sing together at the same time.
Yeah,
That's
it was
great.
all bleed, spill, whatever you want to call it.
I love it. Tell me about the strangest gig you've ever played. As someone who's, as you said, grew up, in Northern California in the '70s playing, and
Right.
someone who enjoys the eclectic nature of music and getting to play a bunch of different things from,
Yeah.
jazz to Americana, pop, whatever. Well, tell me
Yeah.
about the strangest gig you've ever played.
Gosh, well, I started touring nationally in the 80s, when I first started recording for major labels.
Yeah.
And it wasn't too long after I had signed with Bill Graham management and with A&M Records through a production deal with Exit that I got a call from Frontier Booking International, which was a big booking agency then that booked the Police and REM, and they wanted to know if I could go out on tour with an English band called The Fix.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did. And while we were out there, they were like, "Hey, okay," because this was like, I think 8 dates. And they were like, "Okay, so if you want to just stay out, we can put you on, you can catch up with General Public and, Boston, and you can be on tour with them for another 8 dates, and then, and we were like, great, this is everything that we've been hoping for, And so then it was like coming back we had gone up to, I think, Toronto and Montreal to play with them, and coming back into the States. And then they were like, well, we want you to open up for the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Oh, wow.
At the Roxy. I think it was like December 5th, 1984, I think, in New York City at the Roxy. And I remember being so sick.
Oh,
in
no.
my hotel room. And this assistant from the booking agency came over and brought me just like this bag of, every possible thing pill you could pop, and cough syrup you could drink, and everything, just to help me out. And then later my booking agent, John Huey, came over, and he basically gave me the talk that, like, look, the show must go on. So I don't care how sick you are, you're going to be there tonight. And it was there was extra pressure because it was a big gig for us.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't anything like, they were just a little bit more, they had a little bit more experience than us, but they had just recently started touring themselves in late 1983, I think.
Yeah, the Chili Peppers.
Yeah. So we were of, similar generation, although I was a little older than them. But the other thing is that Bill Graham management people were going to be there that night.
Wow.
And so I just needed to show up. So I pulled myself together at the last minute, drank a bunch of cough syrup, and, got in a cab and got down to the theater. And so my set was just kind of a blur.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember it being like very well received, but there being some people right up front who were just a little more punky than, because we were a little more pop, and that they were just sort of like, giving me the bird all night or something. And but somehow we got through it, right?
Yeah.
And then I had never seen a Chili Peppers gig at all.
Yeah.
So we were there was this kind of dressing room thing that was upstairs. And so everybody was there, and it had curtains you could open up into these windows where you could see right down onto the stage. And so we watched the Peppers set while we were talking to all these different guests that were coming in that the management company had invited to the gig.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, they're all naked.
I was gonna ask if Flea had the sock on.
and they came out with the tube socks on their penises, and yeah, unforgettable, unforgettable. So definitely have to put that in the top 5.
I love it.
Most unusual, strange, unique gigs ever, which was, completely harmless.
Sure.
It although, very odd too. But when I think back to like if I want to think about something that's just more like, oh, that was horrible.
Yeah.
I think back to playing in Texas at New Braunfels. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you are.
And at a wave pool.
Okay. At Schlitterbahn, I would imagine, is where
it was. That's exactly where it was. Okay.
Yes. People around here will know it well.
Worst gig ever.
Yeah.
Worst gig ever. So we're playing on a stage that is vibrating.
Oh no.
Right. With the wave pool.
Yeah.
All right. And so you're playing and people are sort of swimming and treading water in front of you listening.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I was like, okay, I mean, it can't get any lower than this.
Oh man.
This is definitely the worst. And the whole time there's like, 60 cycle hum. And for those listeners who don't know what that is basically just think of a low note in the wrong key.
Yeah.
Super loud the whole time that you're playing. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, I mean, all of us got off we went and got on the bus, I think, and just had, a mental breakdown.
Oh man, I bet. Yeah. I'm sure you're probably trying to just not fall into the wave pool the whole time you're playing.
Yes, there was that danger, the splashing in the water, but just the idea that you were playing on something that was shaking the whole time, right?
Like playing through an earthquake.
Yeah, and consequently, I've never played at a wave pool since then.
That's smart. Yeah, very smart. Well, you've spent so much of your career in the studio. I mean, have there been any kind of memorable, studio experiences that you've had?
Sure. Yeah, lots of studio experiences that have been memorable and unusual. I had done a Christmas record that it had a real mixture of people from the gospel community, people from soul and R&B.
Yeah.
It's like Roberta Flack was on it. Al Green was on it. I think Russ Taff, Phil Kagi. Yeah. It was a real mix of people. And the producer, Brown Bannister, had asked me, he was super busy, and he had asked me to co-produce with him on it. It was one of the first things that I did producing wise when I came to Nashville.
What year would it have been?
And that would have been in 1990.
Okay.
Yeah. We moved here in the summer of 89. And then the record was called Our Christmas.
Yeah.
And so I got assigned Al Green.
Wow.
To work on that. And of course, I grew up on Al's music, and big influence on me in terms of R&B, soul, vocal singing. Yeah. And so I put together what I thought was this great gospel kind of rendition of this hymn, and really embedded it with what I thought were sort of Al Greenish kind of ideas and whatnot. And then I sang the work vocal on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I recorded all the tracks, recorded all the background vocals, had some amazing vocalists on it, and it was really, really great. It started with a string quartet and then went into this groove, and it was very evocative, and I just thought it was perfect for him. But again, like I said, I had to put a work vocal or a scratch vocal on it in order for him to hear the, how to sing the arrangement. Because it was very arranged. He would have likely lost at different points if he didn't have a guide for it.
Yeah.
So went to Memphis. Al was great. He was funny. He was a great hang. Very.
Where did y'all
eccentric.
record?
At
High Records by any chance?
No, it was at Joe Walsh's. Gary Bell's studio. I think it was called Kiva at that time, maybe. And so anyway, we got into it, and the producer and me kicked in. And so even though it was Al Green on the other side of the microphone, I still was like, man, this has to be great,
Yeah.
So the first verse had some intonation issues that were bothering me. And I was like, I know we can get it better than this, and I hate to do more than 5 tracks, but we really need to. So I kind of talked him into doing 2 more tracks, and he was like, kind of reluctantly, like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. But prior to that, he and I had gone out in the studio together. We both had headphones on, standing next to each other at the microphone, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm telling him, so that's my voice, Al, that you're hearing. I'm singing that. So just let's follow along together, and I'll cue you into the section so you know what's coming. Yeah. And he's like, yeah, I get it. And so we did that together. So keep in mind that I have, he should know at this point that I'm the person who sang this work vocal.
Right.
All right. So we get to the point where I say, can I get 2 more takes? He reluctantly says, okay, let's do it. And then I'm thinking, it's just still not quite right. And I said, Al, would you mind doing just 1 more take for me? And he just didn't drop a beat. He goes, if you want to hear it again, you're going to have to ask the boy on the tape to sing it.
He was done.
He was done. He took the headphones off, came in the studio, and I was like, okay, I've been beaten at my game, you win that one, great comeback.
I love it.
Of course, never forgotten that.
I bet. Tell me now about your dream gig, as someone who has, like you've mentioned, just such a wide eclectic taste, dream artist to play with, dream bill, dream venue, dream studio, whatever that means to you.
Yeah. I've been fortunate to have, I have played in a stadium. I have not played in a full stadium, like 60 or 70,000 people. But I play, for 20,000 people.
Yeah.
So it's like, I've had that kind of big concert experience, and that's pretty overwhelming,
I bet.
And amazing, and definitely a dream come true for any little kid who grew up thinking I'd want to be on stage someday.
Sure.
And then I've had some really remarkable times, on a small stage. Like I just last year did a film with where I composed a song with the bassist Scott Mulvihill,
yeah,
and using this new technology that he has, that he plays with his bass, triggering sounds that I had developed. And we did this with Brian Blade on drums, who's just one of my all-time favorite
He's great.
drummers, fantastic. Scott Mulvihill on bass, Jeff Coffin from Dave Matthews Band on soprano saxophone, and then Roger Smith from Tower of Power on organ,
Wow.
and me on Fender Rhodes. And so that was in a small jazz club. And, that kind of intimacy, that's really amazing too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of hard to be, when you're playing with the world's greatest musicians in a small
it's a
space.
killer band.
So I think the dream gig for me would be maybe a theater space where you can see the back row.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe it's got a balcony, but you can still see people's eyes.
Yeah.
So that would be the space, if we can picture that space. And then I think it would be where I created some music that I had kind of a hand-picked orchestra. It could be, it doesn't have to be 60 or 70 pieces. It could be a smaller, more sort of custom kind of recording orchestra, but some amount of woodwinds and strings of where I have a composition. And then I have some of those musicians like I described to you, like a Brian Blade or John Patitucci on bass, and where we're just reading, like I've created this music. And so the musicians who read music,
right,
they're going to follow along in this chart, from bar 1 to bar 300, right? Sure. But for us who are improvisers, only thing I would have on the chart would be just clues.
Yeah.
So the next dream gig for me would be something like that. So it's a full audience. Yeah. We can see into everyone's eyes. We're really close to the front of the stage, to the apron of the stage. There's a sense of, you're present with the audience, and it's both planned and unplanned. Mm-hmm. So it's written and it's improvised. And so I would be a part of I'd be probably the only person of the musicians that would know what is written and what is improvised. And then we would play these compositions that were a hybrid of written music and improvisation.
That's beautiful.
And I think that would be my next dream gig. And maybe it would have a theme. Maybe it would have a narrative theme that I would build into it as well. That would be a part of the story.
Yeah.
And then it would also have some aspect of giving away, where maybe we would tell some stories about people in need that could use immediate help, and maybe or talk a little bit about some extraordinary things that people are doing around the world to make the world a better place. So I would see maybe those things integrated in that way.
I love it. That sounds beautiful. I'll be there front row if it happens.
All right. Well, get your tickets now.
Yeah, you bet. Charlie, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been such a thrill. Your memoir, Charlie Peacock Roots and Rhythm, comes out in February, early 4th. February, right? February 4th.
Yeah, February 4th. It's actually available for pre-order now.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, Charlie, this has been, like I said, just a real pleasure, and I hope to get to chat with you again sometime real soon.
All right, Chris. Best to you.
And there he goes, the great Charlie Peacock. Thanks so much to Charlie for coming on the podcast, for taking his time. I really appreciate it. It was such a fun conversation. Please go check out his memoir, Roots and Rhythm, available for pre-order now, out everywhere February 4th. If you are a fan of this podcast, it would really mean a lot to me if you would help spread the word, tell your friends. If you have some music-loving, music aficionados in your life, if you are yourself a musician with a strange gig story, hit me up. Let's get you on the podcast. We hope you all have a fantastic holiday season. And until next time, if you find yourself opening for a tube sock adorned band prompting you to give it away, just remember, a gig's a gig, right?